The Master System is something of an enigma, one of the most powerful home consoles of its time. The machine is barely worthy of a footnote when it comes to deconstructing the history of the American and Japanese gaming industries. It sank almost without trace in these two key territories, failing to make even a dent in the seemingly impregnable armour of Nintendo's NES or Famicom. However, in other parts of the world, most notably Europe and South America, it was a tremendous success, winning hordes of fans and establishing Sega's reputation as a first-rate purveyor of arcade smash hits in the process. Founded in 1940, Sega, an abbreviation of Service Games, initially gained renown for its unique brand of automated coin-operated arcade games. Having plenty of experience in the field of amusements, the company was perfectly poised to compete with true arcade titles like Pong and Space Invaders started to appear. Thanks to games like Future Spy and Zaxxon, Sega soon garnered a reputation as something of an expert when it came to arcade thrills and spills. As the 80s began to unfold, the video game industry seemed unstoppable. Encouraged by the sterling performance of its coin-op division and the sheer amount of money American company Atari seemed to be making from the VCS 2600, Sega decided to enter the home entertainment arena. Released in 1983, the SG-1000 was Sega's first attempt at cracking the console market. However, it was not the triumph the company had hoped for. To make matters significantly worse, Atari managed to successfully flush the US home video game market down the toilet in the same year, causing the first worldwide video game crash. Sega's assets were hit badly in the ensuing fallout, but salvation came from American David Rosen, who had previous ties with Sega, and Japanese businessman Hayao Nakayama. These two men stopped the firm from collapsing into the gaping hole created by Atari's poor management. After a period of stabilisation, Sega was purchased in 1984 by Japanese corporation CSK and subtly rechristened Sega Enterprises. Despite the abject failure of the SG-1000, plans were made for a successor in the shape of an updated SG-1000 Mark II. Sega, like fellow Japanese company Nintendo, knew although the crash of 1983 had damaged confidence in the video game industry, it had created a void that simply begged to be filled, in Japan at least. The Mark II struggled to shift units at retail, but this hardware would eventually evolve in 1985's SG-1000 Mark III. Bar a few technical differences, this was the Master System in all but name. It was around the same time that Sega's rivalry with Nintendo, which would later bloom into a full-scale war when the Mega Drive and SNES arrived on the scene, became apparent. Sega's machine was more powerful than Nintendo's, but when the Mark III and Famicom went head-to-head in Japan, the former was given a rather humiliating beating by the latter. Nintendo's popular console trounced Sega's technically superior hardware thanks to a wealth of third-party support. Developers were infamously forced to agree that they would not publish their NES titles on rival hardware, which left Sega in a rather tight predicament. It could only rely on its own homegrown arcade titles for so long. The solution was to obtain the rights to reprogram the games of other developers, a process that PC Engine creator NEC also indulged in, ironically converting many of Sega's key arcade hits to its own 8-bit format. But even this strategy wasn't perfect. Many of the licensed titles were distinctly lackluster compared to the cream of the crop that the NES enjoyed. Undeterred by the underwhelming performance of the Mark III on home soil, Sega decided to release the hardware in the US, where it was radically restarred and rebranded as the impressive sounding Master System. Released in 1986, a year after Nintendo performed the same trick with the Famicom, which became the big lovable slab of grey plastic known as the NES, the Master System found itself in a similar predicament to the one experienced in Japan. Nintendo had spent the previous year busily promoting its new console and had snapped up key developer support from Capcom, Konami and Taito. Again, Nintendo requested that developers keep their games NES exclusive, and given the unassailable position the console enjoyed, few had the will to defy this request. Despite processing technically superior hardware, Sega had unfortunately come to the party too late, with the Master System also crippled by a meagre software library compared to the multitude of third-party developers that supported the NES. Sega was only able to call upon the allegiance of two in the US, Activision and Parker Brothers. By 1988, Sega's Japanese overlords had decided that enough was enough. Keen to offload the underperforming console, the questionable decision was made to sell the US distribution rights to toy firm Tonka. While the company was the indisputable king of the bright yellow plastic digger, it, sadly, had no experience whatsoever of effectively selling a cutting-edge electronic entertainment system. Tonka immediately made some puzzling choices regarding software choices and vetoed the localization of several key titles, many of which were selling like hotcakes elsewhere in the world. Compared to the stunning collection of software available on the NES, the result was something of a foregone conclusion. Despite Tonka taking over the distribution duties, the Master System continued to perform poorly and was all but ignored by American gamers. A rather pointless Japanese release of the Master System hardware followed in 1987, with the console being treated with the same level of disdain as its predecessor. Unsurprising when you consider it was effectively the same machine that had been released to the general apathy in 1985. It was eventually discontinued in Japan 2 years later. Any other company would have capitulated in the face of such a dismal performance, but Sega wasn't about to give up without a fight. Carefully scanning the globe for possible conquest, the stubby finger of fate fell on Europe, the one region where Nintendo's influence had yet to be felt. Nintendo had released the NES in Europe towards the end of 1986, but poor promotion coupled with a lofty price point meant that the market penetration enjoyed by the machine was decidedly unimpressive. Sega saw the opportunity and pounced. Ably distributed by UK company Mastertronic, previously famous for releasing budget games for the 8-bit home micros. The European variant of the Master System was unleashed in time for Christmas 1987, spurred on by adverts that promoted the console as an arcade in the home and supported by a range of killer coin-op classics such as Hang On, Outrun, Afterburner and Space Harrier. The Master System quickly mopped up the market share Nintendo had been too slovenly to secure. Gamers weaned on the Spectrum and C64 suddenly saw the attraction of owning a home console, rather than playing bumbling, half-assed conversions of their favourite arcade hits by Western companies only concerned with cashing in on the popular titles. Fans could indulge in highly accurate ports produced by Sega itself. The Master System raised the bar in terms of arcade-style gaming, explains Neil West, former editor of Sega Power magazine. The hardware was a leap forward from home computer systems we all had been used to. It was the Master System that many UK gamers experienced instantaneous loading, an astonishing revelation after years of waiting for tapes to load on home computers. Such was the success of the machine that Mastertronic soon found that the Master System was accounted for nearly its entire yearly turnover. Such spectacular performance attracted the attention of Richard Branson's Virgin, who eventually acquired the firm, which was renamed Virgin Mastertronic, and therefore the European distribution rights to Sega's hardware and software. It was a timely intervention and a shrewd business move as the Master System's successor was on the horizon and it would prove to be even more successful. When the Mega Drive Genesis was released, it spelt the end for the Master System in the US and Japan, despite a remodeled alternative appearing in the shape of the Master System 2. Sega reacquired the US distribution rights for its products from Tonka and set about promoting the new-look Master System, possibly in hope that the frenzied public interest in the 16-bit Genesis would somehow trickle down to its 8-bit stablemate. Sadly, it wasn't to be, and the final game was published in the US was Sonic the Hedgehog in 1991. Compare this to Europe, where the Master System 2 was a big success and helped the format cling on to its significant market share. As the Mega Drive started to gather momentum, Sega Europe wisely kept the 8-bit console ticking over with a deep feed of quality titles like Streets of Rage 2, Mercs and Sonic 2. Support finally died away in the mid-90s. Another market where the Master System enjoyed almost unchallenged success was Brazil. Traditionally a region where console technology trails that of the US, Europe and Japan, the machine was released in 1989, but remained widely popular well into the following decade, marketed with impressive skill by Tectoy. The company even went as far as to release a wireless variant of the Master System dubbed the Compact. When you consider this rather sketchy history, which saw the Master System fail catastrophically in 2 of the 3 key worldwide markets, it begs the question, is the console really worthy of a reassessment? The answer is simple. Without this criminally undervalued machine, Sega would not have enjoyed the considerable success it had with the Mega Drive. The Master System allowed Sega to experiment with arcade conversions, original IP and even create a mascot in the form of a lovable monkey boy Alex Kidd. Without the Master System, we also wouldn't have Phantasy Star, one of Sega's most well-known and best-loved franchises. Developers like Yuji Naka and Ayato Oshima cut their teeth on Sega's 8-bit hardware. Although it couldn't boast a sheer volume of classic titles possessed by Nintendo's NES, the Master System is still worthy of praise. The gamers willing to stick with the machines back in the late 80s were treated to a commendable selection of games including Wonder Boy 3, The Dragon's Trap, Psycho Fox, Power Strike, also known as Alisty, Go Villius, Phantasy Star and many others. The fact that Sega was so dominant in the coin-op arena also meant that the machine played host to some commendable ports, as Neil West reveals. The console came out at a time when Sega enjoyed huge influence and power in the coin-op world, which meant a lot of games were available for conversions. Although it could be argued that the promise of an arcade in a home wasn't fulfilled until the advent of the Mega Drive, the Master System nevertheless created a solid foundation to build on and gave gamers an insight into the fascinating world of Sega. This was a company that in the preceding years would scale in the heights of the world video game industry, only to fall from grace in a spectacular fashion almost as rapidly. In that respect, the Master System serves as a remarkable historical piece. With this much maligned console, Sega tentatively tested the waters they would ultimately flounder in.